Today I'm recording from my fort that we made for WoW Week. Okay, so big things are happening in East Berlin. Last 2 chapters we found out that Officer Muller knew about the tunnel, and Goethe and Fritz are somehow able to get him on their side, maybe. He's going to come with them, maybe. Do we trust him? I don't know. And they experience kind of a setback when a pipe bursts in the tunnel. And there's water everywhere, and they're able to fix it, but it seems like a temporary fix. It doesn't seem like something that's going to stay. Okay. Let's begin. With the mud and the standing water, there was nothing more we could do in the tunnel that day. I suggested working on the garden beneath the warming sun, but after we got into the light and saw how filthy the other was, we abandoned the idea of doing anything useful. We took a quick swim in the pond and let ourselves dry off somewhat before walking home. And we checked for Frau Eberhard around each corner before rounding it. I couldn't even imagine the nosy questions she'd have for us tonight, especially if she noticed the cut on my arm. Despite our appearances, it was an uneventful walk home. The people who did see us were used to us being dirty and understood that we were working... That's funny. And understood that we were working on a garden. Where was I? Oh, sorry, guys. Okay. So, they barely seemed to notice we were dirtier than usual. But once we got inside our apartment, something was different. Fritz and Goethe low. I want explanations. Mama had come home. My first thought was for the hidden microphones. Mama had been gone for a few weeks to a place where she didn't have to think about them. Hopefully she remembered that there was always a concern here. Every word we said mattered, and the way we said it mattered just as much. My second thought was for what Mama must be thinking as she stared at Fritz and me. Nothing about us looked good. Beneath the layers of dirt, we were too thin, and our clothes were soiled and ragged. I had become deeply tanned, and my hands and knees were calloused. That's like when your skin gets really hard from lifting. Sometimes you get them here. In only 3 weeks, we had gone from being respectable young people to looking more like workhouse orphans. Fritz smiled warmly, walked forward, and gave Mama a kiss on the cheek. I thought I saw him whisper into her ear when he did, but it was so quiet I couldn't be sure. I walked forward next and wanted more than anything to hug her, but she was so clean I only reached up to kiss her too. When I did, she grabbed my arm and saw the long cut from the rock. What? She started to ask. It's just a scratch, I told her, for the microphones. From a brambly weed. We've been gardening. It was supposed to be a surprise for you. Mama was surprised, all right. She pursed her lips together and then told us both to get washed up. Fritz allowed me in the bath first, and took my time in it. Better here than anywhere near Mama's temper. When the water got cold enough to force me out, I could have sworn more dirt than water ran down the drain. When I got into the front room, I expected to see Fritz beside a fire, having written out explanations to Mama. Then everything would be better. But it was too warm outside to justify a fire without creating suspicion. Mama clearly knew what we were up to, something much bigger than gardening, yet we couldn't freely talk about any of it. While Fritz went to bathe, I asked Mama about Oma Gertrude. I figured that was safe enough. Oma's well enough to get around now, but she'll have a cast for several more weeks. She misses both of you and wondered why you didn't come with me. Where's all our food? Mama had been poking around in the kitchen. There were some things, a cup of flour, and half a bottle of vinegar in the cupboards, some sausage grease in the refrigerator, and something far in the back of the refrigerator that neither Fritz or I recognized. We haven't had time for the store, I said. Mama opened her mouth, closed it, and then marched over to the table, where she began unpacking a bag. Oma Gertrude insisted on sending me home with food. Some things are easier to buy out in the country, and she wanted me to bring them back to you. While I'm cooking, go to your room, Goethe, and get it cleaned up. You could probably garden in there with how dirty it is. Yes, Mama. Less than an hour later, warm, wonderful smells began coming from the kitchen, sausage and potatoes and biscuits. Whatever Oma Gertrude had sent back with my mother, I loved them both all the more for it. Fritz and I didn't need to be called for supper. We were both in our places at the table when Mama served it. Food had never before tasted so good, I was sure of that. I ate greedily and remembered my manners only when I caught a glimpse of Mama's disapproving stare. The two of you have turned to savages, she muttered, and someone had better tell me where all the sheets in this home have gone. Mama didn't sound terribly angry yet, but then she probably hadn't noticed the missing hinges on our coat closet door either. Fritz and I had a lot of explaining to do. We invited her for a walk around the neighborhood that night. We kept ourselves as far as possible from any of the crowds, then our story started to unfold. We started with the picture of the welcome building Papa had sent to me. Mama said my father knew it well. During the war, it had been a clothing shop where his mother used to work. As I had suspected, he had sometimes hidden in the air raid shelter of that basement when the sirens went off. We need to tell you about that shelter, Fritz said. We started with the easier part first, about the garden on the surface, and about the clothesline set up for me to do laundry in the pond. You washed my sheets in a dirty old pond? Mother had always prided herself on her white laundry. Goethe, that will ruin them. They're ruined now, Mama, all of them. I took a deep breath. I need an excuse to be at the pond, so we could dump the dirt. Dump what dirt? Fritz took her hand, and in that moment I was glad that he was the older brother, and telling her it was his responsibility more than mine. He leaned into her and very quietly said, "The dirt from our tunnel, beneath the wall." To her credit, Mama took the news better than we had expected. She didn't yell or faint, neither of which would have surprised me, but it took her a long time to start breathing again, and when she did, it was in loud, shallow gasps. She shook her head in disbelief and let Fritz hold her shoulders to keep her calm. "What have you done?" she whispered. "Oh, my children, why would you do this?" As the reality of our confession sank in, she pulled us into a quiet alleyway and faced each of us with horror in her eyes. I hated seeing that expression from my mother. It was one thing to see fear from Fritz, or to feel it myself, but we had handled our fear, and we were managing our troubles as they came. To see so much worry from Mama was something else entirely. It meant that maybe everything wasn't as safe as we had let ourselves believe. "What will happen when that tunnel's found?" she whispered. "Because it will be. They always are." "We'll be gone by then," Fritz said. "How do you know? You're working in the shadow of the wall. Do you think the guards aren't watching you, aren't curious about what you're doing? A garden is a nice excuse, and maybe they'll ignore the laundry, but for how long?" We hadn't told her about Officer Muller, nor did we intend to. If she knew that one of the Grenzers had already discovered us, it would only strengthen her argument. "Papa wanted us to dig," I said. "Your father would have never asked this," Mama said. "No matter how much he misses us, he would never put us at this much risk." I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think that's true? Do you agree with Goethe more here or Mama? Like, do you think that Aldous, the dad, really would have put them at risk? Did he really want them to dig? Is it possible that they missed something? But he did, I insisted. I saw him. Enough of this nonsense. Starting tomorrow, you will bury up that hole and all the tools with it. You will abandon the garden, and Fritz, you will find a respectable job until you join the military. "I can't get a respectable job, or any job," Fritz hissed, "and I won't join their military. What's done is done. Our only choice now is to leave." "What about Oma Gertrude? Who would take care of her?" I felt awful for having forgotten about my grandmother. We couldn't leave her behind, of course, and with a broken leg, she couldn't make the walk through the tunnel, uneven and narrow tunnel. "I never understood the way your father thought, and I don't understand it in you two either." Mama was shaking her head again. "We have a good life here." "No, Mama," I said, "we don't. So much of what we tolerate is just wrong, even if nobody wants to think about it. We can't keep living this way. But at least we'll live. It's what your father would have wanted. Don't talk about him as if he's dead." My words came out just as sharp as if I'd yelled them. "I know what Papa wanted. For all of us to come to the West with him that night. You said no. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have to build a tunnel, and we'd be safe and all together. This is your fault." "Goethe, that's enough." For a moment, Fritz's tone had sounded the way I remembered my father's voice, and I thought about how disappointed Papa would be if he had heard me speak so rudely to my mother. "I'm sorry," I whispered to her. "That wasn't true." "Some of it is," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for that too, that I wasn't brave when I needed to be." Mama's face seemed to have aged years during our conversation in that alleyway. I felt older too, as if the things I spent so much time thinking about were light years away from what other girls my age were doing. I no longer cared about dolls or dresses or even smuggled Beatles records. What a silly rebellion that was compared to my actions now. near treason in the eyes of my government. Treason is like the worst form of betraying your government. We'll take you to the tunnel tomorrow, I said. You'll see. Only if it's dried out by then, Fritz reminded me. It got a lot of water today. He shouldn't have said that. Mama's back stiffened, and I knew she was picturing Fritz and me swimming for our lives. That hardly helped our cause. Let's go. Mama shook off a shiver that ran through the length of her. I feel too exposed out here. We're safer at home. But as we neared our apartment, I doubted that was true. Stasi vehicles were in front of our building with armed officers on the street. Mama instinctively got us behind her while Fritz and I looked at each other. My heart lurched into my throat. Were they there for us? Oma Gertrude gave me her car, Mama said cautiously. There's not much gas left, but we'll go as far as we can. I parked it in a lot behind us. You and Fritz go get inside the car and hide on the floor. I left the keys on the table upstairs. I'll come back for you soon. No, Mother. Fritz put a hand on her shoulder to guide her away with us. If they're here to arrest Goethe and me, then they'll arrest you too. Before we could act, a woman's screams caught our attention. Stasi officers were leading her outside in handcuffs. I immediately recognized her as the beautiful woman I had seen the night that I stole the pulley. She was trying to fight the officers, but once she got onto the street... Oh my gosh, I can't figure this out today, sorry. But when she got out onto the street and saw the crowd, she yelled, "It's no crime to think or speak or to be me." They were nearly the same words that had been Herr Kraus's handmade stamped papers. Even after being arrested, Herr Kraus must have found another way to get his message out. Maybe with small meetings in his apartment, like those he used to hold with my father. Herr Kraus was brought out again, but this time his body was on a gurney and perfectly still. And since Stasi officers were carrying him out, I figured it was safe to assume his death wasn't an accident. Herr Kraus had received his punishment for daring to think, and for getting others to think too. Sadness stabbed at my gut for how wrong this was, how unfair. Yet I couldn't cry. I wanted to, but in that moment fear was overwhelming every other sense in me. Whatever crimes Herr Kraus had committed, it was safe to assume that Fritz and I had done far worse. If we couldn't get Mama to change her mind, soon we would face Herr Kraus's punishment too. Alright. You can take a break here if you want. I'm just going to close the door. That's better. Okay. Alright. Sorry about this. Video is not going as smoothly as I hoped. Alright. 33. Mama wouldn't allow Fritz and me to go back to the tunnel the next day, not even to garden. But Officer Muller had warned us that time was our enemy, and so I decided even if there was something small I could do to help, I would. We needed to know how wide the death strip was, and the only place I could get a decent view of it was from Anna's bedroom window. Somehow I had to beg, swindle, or steal my way inside. Fritz drew me a picture that explained how to estimate the distance of the strip. The Berlin Wall was 3.5 meters high. I had to look at it and pretend it was laid out flat on the ground. And I had to imagine another wall behind it, and so on across the entire death strip. Try to be as accurate as you can, he whispered in my ear. But if you're going to make any errors, estimate a distance wider than we need. The worst possible mistake is for us to come to the surface inside the death strip. And since Mama didn't know about Anna's and my dissolved friendship, she gladly gave permission for me to visit her. I knew she believed seeing Anna would weaken my resolve to leave East Berlin, but if anything, it would be just the opposite. My pulse was racing when I knocked on Anna's door. Despite the great number of laws I had broken over the past few weeks, none of them caused me anywhere near the guilt that I felt now. I had nothing to offer Anna as either a gift or an apology, and although I was bathed and my hair was combed and I was in one of my few remaining nice outfits, I felt unnatural, as if the sweat and dirt I had earned each day in the tunnel had become the real me. Anna's mother answered the door, and at first didn't seem at all pleased to see me. But she called for Anna, and then, with a voice like an icicle, she invited me in. There, I was in her apartment, though I'd only been allowed in as far as the front door. I could see Anna's bedroom from here, but that wasn't good enough. And once in there, I needed time to look out the window. That would require several uninterrupted minutes. Hello. Anna entered the front room and stopped far short of where I stood. She looked as uncomfortable as I felt, but since I had come to her home, it was my job to repair things. Can we talk somewhere? I asked. In her room would have been nice, but I couldn't ask for too much too fast. Besides, now that I was really here with her, I really did want us to talk. Anna awkwardly motioned me toward her couch. I followed her there, and we sat on either end, so close, and yet it felt as though an ocean divided us, or a wall. I started. You came to help in the garden, and I wouldn't let you. I thought about that a lot since then. I'm sorry. You've changed, Gerta, Anna said. You're frustrated or angry all the time. You're jumpy around others and distant. It's almost like you're... Like I'm what? I hope she wouldn't accuse me of trying to escape, because I have to deny it, and I really didn't want to lie to her anymore, but I had to ask. Anna frowned. Like you're unhappy, I suppose. I miss being your friend, I said softly. That wasn't a lie. Do you? She asked. Because sometimes I think you do, and then other times it's like you don't want me anywhere near you. I'm sorry, I said. I wish you could understand. I want that too. Anna looked sideways at me. Is there anything you could say to me to explain anything? The way she emphasized the final word worried me. Was she asking me to explain my odd behavior over the last several weeks? Because the answer involved telling her the biggest secret of my life, and I could never reveal that. I kind of wonder, do you think Gerta, a part of her, wants to tell that secret to Anna, or someone? Or is she really committed to not telling Anna? Anna's mother came into the room to dust, and Anna quietly rolled her eyes at me. I understood. This was a tough conversation, and having an adult in the room didn't make things any easier. She stood in motion for me to follow her. My heart jumped. We were going to her room. I would have been more excited, except that I couldn't help but feel like a traitor in the face of her trusting attitude. She wanted a chance to repair our friendship. But I was only here as a clumsy sort of spy. Anna's room was the same as it had always been, simple and sparse and painted in a cream color that somehow reflected gray. I'd always thought of it as boring, even depressing, but Anna seemed to like the simplicity. As soon as I entered, my eyes went directly to her window, but the curtains were closed. It feels dark in here. It was a ridiculous thing to say, considering that her curtains were white and plenty of light shone through, but I was committed to it now. I sat at the head of her bed, where I'd have the best view. She took my hint and widened the curtains, though from my current angle I couldn't see as much as I wanted. How do you enjoy gardening? She asked. Pulling my attention from the window, I shrugged. It's not as fun as I thought it would be. It could be a long time before we see if anything grows. If you ever see it. I did a double take, but Anna only smoothed out her bed cover. I mean, since you planned it so late in the year. Right. I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with this conversation. Our friendship was hanging by threads. There was nothing I could do to change that. I was here for one reason only. First, I had to get Anna out of the room. It required me to abandon my pride, but it had to be done. The problem is we haven't had much to eat for a while. Anna responded just as I knew she would. Do you want something to eat now? We have plenty of food. Maybe a sandwich, I suggested. That would take some time to make. It also sounded truly wonderful. Okay. As Anna slid off her bed and left, I went to work. I made sure her door was shut and then crossed to her window. I could see the top corner of the Welcome building from there, but not all the way to the ground. That was a relief. That meant she couldn't be spying on us, even if that was her intention. If I stood at just the right angle, my view of the death strip was better than what I'd expected. In fact, there was a dark area inside the death strip that was probably very close to where we were tunneling. That made it easier to know where to measure. Fritz said the wall was 3.5 meters high, about 1.5 times his height. In my mind, I laid it out flat. That was 3.5 meters into the death strip. I imagined another one behind it, then another and another. I glanced at this area several times before, but it never really considered how much wider it was than I thought. When I stood in the tunnel, I imagined us being at least halfway across, and maybe even more. But we weren't anywhere near that far. Another length of wall went down in my mind, and another. The farther I went, the harder it was to be sure of my distances. So much of the open area looked the same as everywhere around it, and no matter where I stood, I was still at an odd angle. In fact, I might have lost track altogether if I didn't have that dark patch of ground to keep me oriented. Gerta? I swerved away from my window, so startled that I jumped, which must have looked very odd to Anna. Her eyebrows pressed low. What are you doing? Nothing important. I shut the curtain and walked over to take the sandwich from her. My mouth was full with the first bite when I added, Thank you for the food. There's more I can do to help, Anna said. My mother talked to me just now. We know a lot of your clothes have been ruined in the garden this summer, and there's some things I've outgrown. She walked over and opened her small closet. Would it offend you to take any of the things I can't use? She started to pull some outfits from her closet, but my focus was on a pair of her boots on the floor. Not the brown pair she had worn when she visited me in the garden patch before, but her usual black ones. Clumps of mud still clung to the soles, and what was dry had flaked off onto the floor. I had seen so much dirt in the last few weeks that if there was anything I could recognize, it was the dark soil we had tunneled out from beneath the welcome building. Anna had been to the garden patch recently. Maybe she'd gone farther than that. I forgot about the clothes Anna was laying out on the bed, and even about the sandwich in my hand. I need to go, I announced, already halfway to her door. I forgot something. Gerta, don't. Where are you going? Anna called after me. Home. Was it the clothes? Did I do something wrong? Oh, yeah, she certainly had. But behind her innocent facade, she had to know this wasn't about the clothes. I'd always known there was a risk of someone I knew becoming a spy against us, but never in a million years would I have expected it to be Anna. There was no longer any question of our friendship. All that remained was to wonder just how much of an enemy she had become. So she's saying that Anna has an innocent facade. The facade is like your front, so what other people can see. So how do you feel finding this out about Anna? That perhaps she's spying on Gerta and her family. I think this is just another piece of the puzzle, and we're finding out how far of a risk we can take with trusting other people. Okay. Sorry for how glitchy this video was. I hope you still liked it.